And welcome back to the video lecture series for Philosophy 119, Ethical Leadership, offered through the Pennsylvania State University. I'm Dr. William Behun. In our last session, we talked specifically about the role that cultivation would play in raising up a generation of good leaders in Plato's Republic, specifically in the first part of Book 3 of that text. Today I want to turn to some of the details of how Plato believes that a society should be structured, and what this entails for his ideas regarding leadership. First of all, he makes it clear in the second part of Book 3 that physical training, unaccompanied by training in music and poetry, has a detrimental effect on the leader. So while there's certainly a military or martial ethos at play in Plato's writings, it's not exclusively that. Physical training and music are both given to human beings for the training of the soul, and those who are capable of being trained up, that is to say, they possess the proper qualities of the soul, must have a balance of physical and intellectual or spiritual education. It's important to emphasize that for Plato, there are two ingredients to a great leader. There has to be the natural inclination or talent to leadership, but there also has to be education. There has to be training, and without either one, you'll never have a great leader. If you have somebody who doesn't have the appropriate nature for leadership, no matter how much training that person receives, he or she will never be a great leader. In just the same way, if I decide to be a musician and spend the next 20 years of my life training myself in music, I'll be a tolerably good technical musician, but I will never be a great virtuoso. I simply don't have the talent. On the other hand, if I have a great natural talent for music, but I never touch an instrument, then I have no chance to ever become a great musician either. The rulers in Plato's ideal society are the ones who are the best at guarding the city and do what's best for the city as a whole, as opposed to what is best for themselves. And Plato says that those who are to be the best, that is to say, the truly noble, will be guardians as well as rulers. And they'll guard against, he says, external enemies and internal friends, so that the first will lack the power and the other the desire to harm the city. So how then does Plato propose that we instill in a generation of leaders this willingness to sacrifice all for the city? This is where he introduces what we generally refer to as the noble lie. The noble lie is a myth that Plato is going to use in order to convince those who are being raised in this new city that everyone in the city is their brother or sister, and actually they all come from a common mother, which is the city itself. The lie is that they weren't actually born from human parents, and they didn't have a childhood, and they didn't have all of these things that they remember from their past life. But actually they were born up out of the earth, and the earth itself is their mother, and everyone within the city is their brother or sister, to whom they owe a debt of family loyalty. Now, I think it's reasonable to ask how seriously Plato takes this. However, he is making an important point here. While it's blameworthy for a private citizen to lie, to be dishonest, in the hands of a leader, the lie can actually be a useful tool in much the same way that a drug in the hands of an ordinary citizen can be a dangerous poison. But in the hands of a doctor, somebody who's got the right qualifications, that same poison can act as a cure. The second part of this noble lie is that everyone is born with a certain admixture of metal in their soul. Some have gold, some silver, some bronze, some iron. Those who have gold in their souls are those who possess the proper qualities of the soul to become great guardians. The only thing that's lacking is the training or education. Those who have silver in their souls will become, he says, the auxiliaries, those responsible for carrying out the will of the guardians, or as we sometimes call them, the philosopher kings. And Plato says that the worst that can happen is that these auxiliaries and guardians, the silver and gold, become savage masters rather than kindly allies. And that the only reason that such a thing would happen would be lack of education. Interestingly, one might imagine that the silver and gold are the most exalted classes, and that they would have a kind of correlation to the upper or wealthy classes in today's society. But in fact, in some regards, just the opposite is true. The guardians, those who possess the spiritual gold, are forbidden even to touch physical gold. They own no property. They live in common, in barracks, like soldiers. Essentially, they've taken a vow of poverty. Even the auxiliaries live like soldiers and are strictly limited in terms of what they can own as private property. The so-called lower classes, iron and bronze, are those that Plato calls the desiring classes, and what they desire is material wealth. So Plato says, let them have it. If this is what they prize above all else, why should we deny it to them? However, this comes with a price, and the price of that material wealth is political power, just as the price of political power is the sacrifice of material wealth. So we see that in Plato's ideal city, economic and political power are radically divided. This is very different from Plato's own society, where political power and economic power go hand in hand. One either had both or neither. And this is true of today's society as well. Plato says that if the guardians own private property, they will become hostile masters, looking out for their own economic interests rather than the good of the city as a whole. While this strict hierarchy may seem problematic to us, it fits perfectly well with Plato's notion of the overall structure of society and the world. In our next session, we're going to be looking at some of the underlying metaphysical principles that inform this kind of hierarchical structure, and we can see a certain parallel between what Plato describes in the myth of the metals and what he's going to talk about in one of his most famous passages, the allegory of the cave.